Zalvanna stood in the grand hall of the Zyran imperial palace, her fingers tightening around the ceremonial decree in her hands. The words burned into her mind. By order of the Imperial Council, Princess Zalvanna of the Zyran Imperium shall be wed to General Alexander Kane of the Terran Union in accordance with the Treaty of Varelk. A marriage. To a human. To him. Her breath came sharp, controlled, though her heart pounded like a battle drum. She had seen the reports, the holovids, the whispered accounts from surviving warriors. Kane the Butcher, the unyielding, the human warlord who never lost a battle. And now she was to be his wife? Lady Risari, her most trusted adviser, stood at her side, voice measured but firm. Your Highness, the Council has already ratified the decision. The Terrans demanded a blood bond to solidify peace. Peace? Zalvanna scoffed, pacing. This is not peace. This is surrender disguised as diplomacy. Her father, Emperor Vaktar, watched her from his throne of Blackstone, his gaze unreadable. He had ruled through wars, through blood and steel, yet now he spoke a compromise. This is survival, he corrected. Would you rather the war continue? Millions more dead? The humans do not seek to conquer us, but they will provoke further. She turned sharply. Then let them. We are Zyran, we do not bend. Vaktar's voice turned cold. We already have. Silence. It hung between them like an executioner's blade. Zalvanna clenched her fists. She had trained in battle since childhood, wielded blades against the finest warriors of the Imperium, yet she had never felt so powerless. The thought of standing before him, a man whose very name sent tremors through battle-hardened generals, made her stomach twist. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Tell me about him, she finally said, voice quieter now. Lady Risari nodded and activated the holo display. A projection flickered to life, a towering figure in dark battle armor, human in form yet exuding something alien to her people. His face was hard, angular, unreadable. Not monstrous, not grotesque, but severe, calculating. This is General Alexander Kane, Risari narrated, Supreme Commander of the Terran Union's military forces. 57 recorded battles, 57 victories. Zalvanna crossed her arms. Ruthless. Efficient, Risari corrected. His forces do not waste resources. They strike precisely, adapt quickly, and refuse to yield. The hollow shifted. Kane in battle, issuing silent commands as cities burned behind him. Zyran warships decimated. Squads moving in perfect unison. She swallowed. A conqueror. A survivor. Her father interjected. Like us. The feed continued. Kane in negotiations, unmoving, his expression like stone. His voice, clipped and direct, made Zalvanna tense involuntarily. The war ends now. You can fight and you will lose. Or you can live. Choose. Cold certainty. No boasting. No cruelty. Just fact. Zalvanna's throat tightened. And this is the man I am to call husband? A final image flickered onto the display. Kane standing over a fallen Zyran commander, blood on his uniform, eyes dark as the void. Her stomach twisted. She shut off the projection. When? 3 days, her father said. The Terrans have summoned you to their diplomatic station. Her hands trembled, but she stilled them. No weakness, no fear. She had fought too long, trained too hard. To falter now. She turned to Risari. Prepare my armor. Her father frowned. You will not need it. She met his gaze. I will. Night fell upon the Zyran capital, its twin moons casting cold silver light over the towering spires. Zalvanna stood on her balcony, staring out into the abyss of space. Somewhere out there, Kane waited. She exhaled slowly, whispering to the void. I am doomed. Alexander Kane stood in his command quarters aboard the Terran diplomatic station, staring at the war maps flickering on his holodeble. The lines of battle had faded, borders redrawn, but the war still lingered in the air, a ghost refusing to be exorcised. His orders had changed. No longer a general on the battlefield, but a man sealing peace with a ring instead of a rifle. A marriage to a Zyran princess. Reeves, the second in command, folded his arms. You don't look thrilled, sir. Kane exhaled, glancing at the diplomatic summons. I'm not. They say she's beautiful. They also say she was raised to kill men like me. Reeves smirked. Then it's a match made in hell. Kane didn't return the humor. His mind was on the princess, not as a woman, but as a product of her people. The Zyran Imperium was bred for war, its aristocracy as sharp as its blades. She would hate this arrangement. So would he. The Holidable displayed a dossier on Zalvanna, her history, her combat records. A warrior in her own right, trained in the Zyran art of war, a prodigy with a blade. He respected that. But respect didn't change reality. This was a political gambit, nothing more. Reeves studied him. So what's the plan? Break the ice with charm. Kane let out a dry chuckle. You ever know me to be charming? Reeves shrugged. Fair point. Kane shut off the display. I'm not here to win her over. I'm here to keep the peace. The ship's AI chimed in. Incoming transmission. Zyran envoy approaching. His jaw tightened. Here we go. The docking bay was silent as Kane watched the Zyran delegation disembark. Their soldiers moved in rigid precision, clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the artificial lighting. Then she stepped forward. Princess Zalvanna. She was smaller than he expected, but there was no mistaking the strength in her posture. Braided silver hair framed sharp green eyes that studied him with the intensity of a blade pressed to his throat. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken hostility. She was the first to break it. General Kane. A measured voice, cold and even. He inclined his head. Princess. She looked him over, as if weighing an opponent before a duel. I expected someone different. I imagine we both did. Tension hung between them, unyielding. Kane gestured toward the private chamber, prepared for their meeting. Shall we? She hesitated, but followed. Inside, the air was thick with restrained aggression. Kane studied her, noting the stiffness in her posture, the way her fingers twitched near her belt, instinct screaming to be ready for a fight. He leaned back. I know this isn't what you want. Her expression remained impassive. Then why agree to it? Because the alternative is war, and I've had enough of war. She scoffed, crossing her arms. Strange words from a man who ended it. Kane didn't flinch. Strange times. Her eyes narrowed. And what do you expect from this? Obedience? Submission? He met her gaze, steady and unyielding. I expect cooperation. Nothing more. She studied him, searching for deception. Finding none, the silence stretched again, this time less hostile. Kane leaned forward. You don't know me, and I don't know you. But I'm not here to own you, princess. I'm here to understand you. For the first time, something flickered in her gaze. Uncertainty, perhaps, but she masked it quickly. Then you have much to learn, General. Kane allowed himself the barest hint of a smirk. So do you? Zalvanna sat across from Kane in the dimly lit chamber, the tension between them a blade's edge. Days had passed aboard the Terran station. Each interaction measured, every word a test. She had expected cruelty, arrogance, demands. Instead, she found restraint, a man who chose silence over dominance. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. You don't act like a conqueror, she said finally. Kane regarded her with unreadable eyes. And you don't act like someone willing to be conquered. Her jaw tightened. Because I am not. Good. He leaned back, arms folded. I have no use for weakness. Something in the way he said it, detached, without insult, made her pause. A challenge, not a dismissal. Still, the differences between them were stark. Humans were blunt, unpredictable, quick to shift their strategies. Zyran valued structure, hierarchy, tradition. Their conversations were an endless clash of philosophies, neither willing to yield ground. At a formal dinner, she tested him. Tell me, General, do Terrans always make decisions based on instinct rather than wisdom? Kane barely lifted his glass. Instinct is wisdom, at least when survival is on the line. Spoken like a man who has never feared losing control. He met her gaze evenly. Control is an illusion. Adaptation wins wars. She scoffed. And is that what you see this as? A war? Kane set his drink down. It doesn't have to be. She hated how steady he was, how nothing rattled him. But then, something did. The attack came without warning. A burst of energy fire erupted through the station's corridors, alarms blaring. Guards scrambled as masked figures emerged, weapons drawn, moving with precision. Zyran assassins. Zalvanna recognized her insignia immediately. Imperium loyalists. Those who reject the treaty. One assassin lunged for her, blade flashing. Before she could react, Kane moved. Fast. A blur of motion as he intercepted the strike, twisting the attacker's wrist until the bone snapped with a sickening crack. Zalvanna drew her own blade, instincts taking over. She spun low, slashing through another assailant's armor, the fight instinctive, practiced. Kane fought beside her, fluid and brutal. No wasted movements. No hesitation. He fought like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. A blade arced toward his side. Zalvanna saw it before he did. Without thinking, she pivoted, driving her own weapon to the attacker's chest. Silence followed. The last assassin fell. Zalvanna turned to Kane, heart pounding. Blood streaked his uniform, his left arm cut deep. He exhaled slowly, studying her. You didn't have to do that. She sheathed her blade. Neither did you. A pause. Something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Kane gave a small nod. Maybe we're not so different after all. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but for the first time, she wondered if peace between them wasn't just possible. Maybe it was inevitable. Zalvanna stood at the viewport, watching the endless void stretch beyond the station. The attack had changed something. Before, she had seen this marriage as a prison, a political maneuver forced upon her. But now, things weren't as simple. Kane had fought beside her, not out of obligation, but instinct. And she had saved him without hesitation. She didn't know what to make of that. The door behind her slid open. She didn't turn. How's the arm? Kane stepped closer. Nothing serious. She finally faced him. His uniform was clean again, but the wound in his arm was still fresh. A thin line beneath the bandages. It should have felt satisfying. Proof that he was just as mortal as anyone else. Instead, it unsettled her. They were Zyran, she said. Loyalists who see me as a traitor. I figured. Kane folded his arms. And you? She hesitated. I expected this. I meant, do you still see yourself as a traitor? The question cut deep. She had spent her life as a warrior, raised to fight against men like him. Yet here she was, standing beside him, alive because of him. I don't know, she admitted. Kane nodded, as if that answer was enough, then figured out. His bluntness should have angered her. Instead, it grounded her. Later, in the council chamber, the Terran and Zyran diplomats gathered. The treaty was to be finalized. The marriage would seal it. Zalvanna sat beside Kane as the formalities began. Pledges, agreements, oaths spoken in clipped diplomatic tones. But none of it mattered compared to the final moment. Princess Zalvanna, the officiant declared, do you accept this union in the name of peace? The room stilled, all eyes on her. She turned to Kane. He watched her, impassive, unreadable as always. He would not beg for this, would not ask. This was her choice. She thought of the war, the bloodshed, the soldiers who would never return home. She thought of the fight in the corridor, the way he had moved without hesitation, not to control her, but to stand with her. She exhaled. I do. The words left her lips, foreign and unfamiliar, but they were true. Kane inclined his head, a barely perceptible acknowledgement. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I do. The treaty was signed. The war was over. As the ceremony concluded, Kane leaned in just enough for her to hear. This isn't the end, he said. She met his gaze. No, she agreed. It's just the beginning.